Hello guys, welcome to the TV show program. My name is Melissa Urquia. The topic that we are going to develop in this presentation is going to be a brief history of teaching language. So, we will talk about from the history to modern education of foreign language. It is into account that the whole world is going through a pandemic called COVID-19 virus, and and the schools and teachers are turning new methodologies and new technology to teach the subject, and the English is it's too. So we have invited some panelists, including a historian and two renowned teachers, and they are here to talk about the history of teaching language. Let's welcome to them.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Vanessa Moran, and I am a historian. I graduated from one of the best universities in the world. And this morning, I will talk a little about a brief history of language teaching. For me, it is a pleasure to be here to share my knowledge with you.
Hello everyone, my name is Tatiana Yurimoida Paniagua, and I am a teacher specialized in the implementation of modern methods in language teaching, which has given me the opportunity to work and offer my knowledge at the University of Don Bosco. And let me tell you that it's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you, and thanks for the invitation.
Hello, I'm teacher and I'm going to talk about the language teaching innovation in the 19th century and a brief story language teaching.
Hello, one more time. As I said before, I am a historian, and I will talk about a brief history of language teaching. A history of the English language aims to equip students with the skill, insight, and appropriate theological approaches necessary to analyze and describe changes in the structure of the English language from the earliest written records to the present day. The best language teaching method. Let me tell you that there are three teaching methods that dominate the business of language instruction. Number 1, the direct method. Number 2, the grammar translation method. And number 3, the audiolingual method. Well, deciding which is the best method is difficult because each has strengths and weaknesses, and the nature of the student works will determine which is the best for that student, right? Although many language training sources may speak about exclusive or unique approaches with few exceptions, they are using one of these three methods. But let's talk about the method. Number 1, the direct method. It is also known as the oral or natural method. It is based on the active involvement of the student in the both speaking and listening to the new language in realistic everyday situations. Here, the learner is encouraged to think in the target language rather than translate. He or she hears and uses the language before seeing it written. Number 2, the grammar translation method. This method grew from the traditional method of teaching Latin in Greek. The method is based on analysis of the written language using translations, exercise, reading comprehension, and written imitation of text. Learning mainly involves the mastery of grammatical rules and memorization vocabulary list. And the last one is the audiolingual method. This method is also known as the oral method. It is based on repetition of dialogues and phrases about everyday situations. These phrases are imitate, repeat, and try to make the response automatic. Reading and writing are both reinforcement of what the learner practices. Well, changes in language teaching methods throughout history have reflected recognition of changes in the kind of proficiency learner needs, such as move toward oral proficiency rather than reading comprehension as the goal of language study. They have also reflected changes in theories of the nature of languages and of languages learning. Language teaching specialists like Marcel, Prendergast, and Gavin have done much to promote alternative approaches to language teaching, but their idea failed to receive widespread support or attention. The discipline of linguistics was revitalized. One of the early goals of the association was to improve the teaching of modern language. It advocated: Number 1, the study of the spoken language. Number 2, phonetic training in order to establish good pronunciation habits. Number 3, the use of conversation text and dialogues to introduce conversational phrases and idioms. Number 4, an inductive approach to the teaching of grammar. And number 5, teaching new meaning through establishing association within the target language rather than by establishing association with the mother tongue. Linguistics too became inserted in the controversy that emerged about the best way to teach foreign languages, and ideas were frequently discussed and defended on books, articles, and pamphlets. Henry Sweet argued that some methodological principles should be based on scientific analysis of language and study psychology. Henry Sweet, in his book, he set forth principles for the development of teaching methods, and these are the following. Number 1, careful selection of what is to be taught. Number 2, imposing limits on what is to be taught. Number 3, arranging what is to be taught in terms of the 4 skills of listening, speak, reading, and writing. And number 4, grading materials from simple to complex. Let me tell you that the English language teaching tradition has been subject to tremendous change, especially throughout the 20th century. Perhaps more than any other discipline, this tradition has been practiced in various adaptations in language classrooms all around the world for centuries. It has been estimated that some 60% of today's world population is multilingual. It is fair, then, to say that throughout history foreign language learning has always been an important practical concern, whereas today English is the world's most widely studied foreign language. 500 years ago it was Latin, for it was the dominant language of education, commerce, religion, and government in the Western world. In the 16th century, however, French, Italian, and English gained in importance as the result of political changes in Europe, and Latin gradually became displaced as a long language of spoken and written communication. Let me tell you a quote. This quote was said by Federico Fellini. A different language is a different vision on life. That was all for me. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone. I think all of us know that there have been many changes in language teaching through history, whether to know how they taught in ancient times and how to teach now. So the learning of a foreign language has always been a practically important concern. For what as a modernist of language teaching, it is important to talk about the history of current teaching. So for this, in this time, I will talk about language teaching and its innovation between the 19th and 20th centuries. Well, In the middle of the 19th century, theories began to produce changes in the language teaching system, as there was a greater demand for the ability to speak foreign languages, as it was increasingly seen that the public education system was failing in its responsibility for what the language teaching specialists developed new approach to language teaching, each with a specific method for forming modern language teaching. So, among of the reformers who developed new approaches to improve language teaching were Henry Swift from England, Paul Passy from France, and Wilhelm Viethor from Germany. These reformers believed that teaching should be based on scientific knowledge about the language, that should begin with speech and expand to other skills such as words and sentences, where grammar must be taught inductively. And this is also where the method of grammatical translation begins to be questioned and rejected. Since for these reformers, they express that translation should be avoided in for the most part. And the belief and ideas of these reformers spread and consolidate in what became known as the direct method, which was the fear of natural methods that became popular in language school, but was not very efficient with large classes or school due to the limitation of time and size of classrooms. So, the direct method in the last 2 decades of the 19th century ensuring a new era. This method was proposed by Charlie Berlitz, in which the principal basis of this method was that learning a second language is similar to learning a first language. In other words, that is to say that there must be a lot of oral interaction, since as we know, we humans learn another language by practicing and losing the fear of making mistakes in order to have greater fluency in the language. But basically, the principle of the direct method were the following. The introduction into the classroom was carried in the target language. It can be said that the class was living to develop in the language being taught, and concrete vocabulary was taught through image and object, while abstract vocabulary was taught by association of ideas. It can be said that as a teacher we realize that the student learns more easily when he associates words with objects, and it can be said that these methods enjoy a great popularity in the late 19th century and early 20th century. However, after a period of decline, the direct method was reviewed, which led to the emergence of the audiolingual method. This method theorized that the acquisition of language occurs through habit and repetition, where it takes speech as its main focus. And it is important to emphasize that these methods emphasize oral exercise and imitation of set phrases as well as pronunciation. This method has a basis similar to the basis of the direct method. But I know that many of you will wonder what methods are being used in language teaching in pandemic time. And let me tell you that this is one of the most common questions that people ask me whenever I speak about this topic. And let me tell you that language teaching methods in pandemic time have remained the same. These methods have not changed, and that is to say that the teaching of language in time of the pandemic has consisted of a chain of means, not of method. These remain the same since as we have been able to observe during the pandemic, various means have been using, such as applications such as Google Meet, Sun, Schoology, and Virtual Classroom, in which a student can obtain different knowledge. But this doesn't mean that the method of the face-to-face education system are not the same than the method of the online education system. On the contrary, are the same. For example, in learning a language, the basic method of grammar and translation doesn't cease to be so by using a digital dictionary instead of a paper one. So I have no doubt that the language teaching methods will evolve positively over the time with the help of media. Okay, this is all for me. Thank you.
Language teaching innovation in the 19th century. Toward the ninth century, several factors contribute questioning and revision of the grammar translation method. Increased opportunity for communication among European increased a demand for oral provising in foreign language. Alright. Initially, this increased a market for conversation books and phrases books intended for private study. But language teaching specialists also return their attention to the way modern language were being taught in secondary schools. Increasingly, the public education system was seen to be failing in its responsibility. In Germany, England, France, and other parts of Europe. Alright. The Frenchman C. Marceau refers to child learning is a model for language teaching, emphasizing the importance of meaning in learning. Process the reading without thoughts before other skills. The first to record observation that children use contextual and interns and memorize phrasewords and routines. His method uses situation and themes as ways for organizing and presenting oral language. The famous sequence of sentences relate to such activities. For example, in the first lesson of the foreign language, the following will be learned. For example, while towards the door, I walk, and I drove near to the door, I drove near. And other examples. And the emphasis on the need to represent new teaching items in the context that makes their meaning clear, and the use of gesture and action that to convey the meanings of interesting are practices that later become part of such approach and method.
Now we have another section in this program. Through social networks, some teachers are asking, and with the help of the panelists, we are going to answer to this question. The first question is by Nicole Michelson, And the question is going to be for Jacqueline Cruz. And the question is, why is important to know the history of language teaching? Please answer.
Well, knowing the history of language teaching is very important, since it encourages writers and speakers to recognize the vitality and legitimacy of the English they use at home, school, or work. We, as future teachers, must take into account that English is constantly evolving and that knowing everything about the history will help us understand all those changes. The content of this history teaches us that English has many different dialects. In addition, knowing about history makes us participate and anticipate the results that we could obtain through the application and practice of the best teaching method.
The second one is asked by Tony Smith. This question is for Judith Morgan, and the question says, which of these old teaching methodologies employ currently with your students?
Well, let me tell you that one of the ancient methods of language teaching that I currently like to use is the situational method, better known as the audiovisual method. This method was utilized in the 15th and 17th. But despite the fact that this method is old, I would like to implement this method in my modern teaching style because this method proposes a learning methodology based on the creation of situations for use in class with the help of objects, drawings, teaching materials, action and gesture that allow us to understand the meaning of the new element. And therefore I like to implement this method in my teaching style because with the years of experience that I have in the field of teaching, I have observing that young people learn a language more easily when they are presenting real situation or with the help of teaching materials that present them a real and concrete idea of what they are learning.
And finally, we have the third one. It is asked by Mila Bianchi. The question is for Erika Ortiz. And the question says, what could have been the teaching methodology for language students if the COVID-19 virus had broken out when online education was not well known? Please answer this question, Erika Ortiz.
Online learning is an educational process which takes place over the internet as a form of distant education. Distant education became ubiquitous as a result of COVID-19 pandemic during 2020. Because of this circumstance, online teaching and learning had an indispensable role of students. The pandemic will have spread more slowly, but Telegram work and online education will have been impossible, and our leisure of in confined would have been much more limited.
Thank you for all our panelists. And today, knowing in English is important because every day that passes in our work or educational context is a state of globalization around us. This continues to transcend the borders based on knowledge for our own develop in that for our country. However, this is a very useful tool to today because all us to communicate with other people from the other countries wherever for work, economical economics, travel, tourism, among others. But it's important to know English. But to learn English, we need people to teach us. But English, but those people are training with academic excellence, who know the history of language teaching. We are going to say goodbye with an Arabic proverb that says, "Don't say it is impossible. Better say that you have not tried yet." Bye bye, guys. See you next time.